Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today, I'm running solo. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict, so this may not be the smooth experience you've come accustomed to, but we're going to do our best. Hope everyone's doing well out there. Ken, I hope you don't get yourself in any trouble backstage there. Got people joining from all around the world, even somebody, here's Samuel, joining from Wakanda. It's great to have you here. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Let's head on over to our agenda and we'll show you what we've got going here. Just pop that over here. Okay, great. First up, I'm using a different microphone today. You may notice a difference in the overall sound. I'm using the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X. It is a large diaphragm condenser microphone. That's what you see right here. And we'll be comparing that to my live streaming favorite, the Earthworks SR314, in just a minute here. Just put up a review, kind of not so much a review, but more of a kind of, I guess, first impressions video on the new Beyerdynamic Pro X, both headphones and microphones. And this is one of the microphones here. Actually, this is the one I was more excited about than the M70, which is a dynamic broadcast style microphone. All right, we'll then also have a sample from a $1,700 microphone. I don't want to reveal what that is just yet, but we'll give you a sample of what that is, and so you can hear it and give me your impressions relative to these other two microphones. I want to talk a little bit about price versus how a microphone sounds, or any audio gear, really. I think it's an interesting discussion. And then we'll hop into our question and answer. We had several questions submitted ahead of time. So with that, let me go back over to the main microphone here. So today, let me just tell you a little bit about our audio signal chain so you're aware of everything here. First of all, we have the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X, large diaphragm condenser microphone. I'm probably 6 inches away. I could probably get a little closer there. Maybe 4 or 5 inches there. So that's what you're hearing right now. Condenser microphone, it does have a presence peak, but what they did is something kind of interesting with that presence peak is that it looks like they tried to carve out a little spot for sibilance. So they wanted to add sparkle, but no sibilance. And I think overall they did a pretty nice job, but that's what you're hearing right now. Now I also have over here my standby favorite for live streaming, and that is actually we've got this on the new Rode PSA1 boom arm here, and it's a bit of a stretch, but we're gonna bring that in. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and switch back and forth between these. Oh, I didn't finish the signal chain. Let me just do that really quickly. So this, of course, is going then into the Allen & Heath SQ5 mixer, and then that comes into the camera, the Canon C70. That comes into the A10 Mini, and then that goes out to the stream on YouTube that you're hearing right now. So that's the overall signal chain that we're looking at here today. So that's and actually the same thing for the SR314. It is also going through the SQ5, so it goes on that same signal path. All right, right now, one other thing I can show you. Let's just pull this up here. I have my SQ mix pad. Let me just switch over to that. There we go. All right, so you can see right now the M90 Pro X is the one that is unmuted. The other two are not. Oh no, I ruined it. We're switching back. If you were sharp-eyed, you saw which microphone we're going to be listening to later. But that's anyway. I do have a little bit of compression applied to both of these microphones, and the reason I'm doing that is just to prevent any sort of clipping, just so that you're aware of where we're coming from. So let me go ahead and switch on over to the Earthworks. Right now, again, we're on the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X. Let's switch on over. Okay, now you are hearing the Earthworks, and I'm trying to maintain about the same distance here. So this is the Earthworks. I'm curious in the chat if you wouldn't mind sharing your impressions of the differences between these two, at least on my voice. And that's part of what I want to kind of make the point of here is that it's so hard to say, and I see that Bandrew's here. I think we've had this conversation that it's so hard to say, you know, if someone asks, what's a great mic I should buy for my podcast or live stream or YouTube videos or whatever, and it's really hard to say because every person's voice sounds different through every microphone. So it's really, really hard to do that. And you know what would be really great is if we had, and maybe in some cases there are things like this, and I've seen them at trade shows every once in a while, but a place where you could actually go and record your voice through a bunch of different microphones and then, you know, be able to make an evaluation from there. Let me switch back on over to the Beyerdynamic just to kind of reset our ears. Okay, now we're back on the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X. In terms of pricing here, these are different. The Beyerdynamic is a $350 microphone. The Earthworks is a $700 microphone, if I remember correctly. So, in any case, so that's the difference between those two, and that's where we're at right now. I'm getting distracted by the the great comments that are coming in the chat, so thanks for that. Normally I've taken myself out of the chat lately so that I could kind of focus a little bit more on the live stream, but it's trade-offs either way, right? So in any case, so that's a little bit of a sample between the two. I'm curious what each of you think by what you put in the chat there. We'll take a look at that in just a minute here. All right. Let's just put a couple of these up here. So Audio Buff, I'm surprised how close of a sound they have. Soto Cine says, sounds the same. Techno Cheesecake prefers the first. Second is a little harsher with sibilance. Has a bit of oomph to it through the low mid. So it sounds like you prefer actually the less expensive microphone, the Beyerdynamic. Mike says, very little difference listening on decent prosumer speakers. Bear sounds flatter to me, but I'm listening on a phone, so take that in mind. Yeah, always tough to make those calls on the phone. Daniel James says, I agree, they sound quite similar to one another. Keith McManus says, the Bear sounds a little sharper, crisper. Okay, interesting. Great insights. Thanks so much for sharing those. And they were pretty similar to my ears. There are some differences, definitely. But pretty similar. And, you know, this is a case where for a lot of people, we don't have any sort of EQ on these right now, but if somebody were to ask, this would be a case where I could probably say with pretty good confidence, okay, the Beyerdynamic is pretty close and for less than half the price or right around half the price, I guess it is. So pretty good option there. So it's not always a case that price, higher price equals better sound. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Sometimes there are different features or nuances that are different. And we'll have this conversation a little bit more when we come to talk about wireless a little bit later on. And someone had a question about, whether or not 2.4 gigahertz wireless systems can be used professionally. And I have some definite thoughts on that. So we'll come back to that. Here are a couple more comments here we have from Michael. Earthworks to my ear seems to have a little better definition, but they are very, very similar. Techno Cheesecake he asked us to hang on. He's going to go listen on his Adams. Good idea. I couldn't tell the difference listening on KRK Rocket 5s. Beyer has a slightly higher top end, but actually it's really nice. And then Techno Cheesecake says, listening on the Adam A7Xs now. Do you know how the self-noise compares? I don't off the top of my head, but we could certainly look that up. So let's go to Beyerdynamic. I don't think that Beyer specified any self-noise specs on these. A little frustrating. I don't know why they didn't. Let me just double check that. Technical data, maybe they'd have it here. When I click on technical data at the Beyerdynamic, here's the spec sheet. Okay, here we go. I'll pull this up in just a second here. Okay, let's switch on over to the Mac. All right. Signal to noise ratio, 88.4 dB A-weighted. Equivalent sound pressure level A-weighted. I'm not sure what that is exactly. It's an interesting spec. I wonder if they meant equivalent. EIN is normally the noise specification, usually A-weighted, and it's usually in that range. So if that is the case, that's pretty good. Let's head on over here and let's go to Earthworks. Earthworks Audio. Let's go to SR314. Whoops. There it is, one of my favorite mics. Specifications. I don't know that they have specified the equivalent input noise. Doesn't look like they have. Oh, noise, 15 dB SPL equivalent, A-weighted. So technically, well, see, we don't know what this spec is over here for the Beyer. Where'd it go? Here it is. If that is indeed equivalent input noise, then the Beyer probably has it beat technically. I don't know that I noticed a big difference from what I can hear with my ears, but it is an interesting question. So, and probably worthy of some practical tests there. So good question, Ian. Techno still prefers the Beyer. Okay. I think it is your voice. You can make any mic sound amazing. I mostly agree with that. I have used some mics that actually become so sensitive in certain areas that even EQ cannot make them sound great. But it is true that you can use EQ to make a lot of microphones sound great, and especially if you're talking about two microphones that both sound pretty good from the start. But once you start getting into others, once you get into, it's usually going to be the less expensive, lower quality mics. For example, one mic that I have never been able to make sound great on sibilant voices is a Sennheiser ME2 lavalier microphone. Give that a try. If you can make that sound great on my voice, I would love to know how you do that. But I understand your sentiment, and definitely I think there is a lot to that. Linda says, sounds good from the tiny phone speakers. Switching to the cheap BT headphones now, so the Bluetooth headphones. Peter asked if we can switch back and forth a few more times. Absolutely. Let's bring the Earthworks back in over here. Okay, now I'm back on the Earthworks SR314. And so we can get a little bit more of a sample on the Earthworks and see how that sounds. All right. Daniel says, I'm listening with Sennheiser 280 Pro headphones. I can hear a difference, but as I said previously, I think they're quite similar. That said, I think I might prefer the Beyerdynamic. Very good. Still sounds clean. But you have a great face for audio. Or radio, excuse me. Thanks a lot, Audio Buff. Really appreciate that. Earthworks sounded a little more boomy on my Atoms. The Beyerdynamic is more rounded. Interesting. Very good. Thanks for the insights there. All right. So there we are on the Earthworks. Let's switch back over to the Beyerdynamic. And now here we are back on the Beyerdynamic. Just a word note, we'll have actually a review of this at some point, and you can just barely see it here. But this is the new Rode PSA-1 boom arm, or the kind of microphone arm. Like sort of a broadcast arm. And I'm actually pretty impressed. $130 is what it's retailing for. The mechanisms seem much better than most $100 boom arms that I've seen. It almost seems like a lot of them are just copies of each other, of the $100 ones. And they are not, they're really frustrating, especially this mechanism right here, to which you attach the microphone. This seems really, really well built with some very solid metal pieces here. So it looks to me like they've done a really nice job on that. The only thing I don't love, well, I'm not going to review it now. We'll come back to that. But there's that. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about different microphones and prices on microphones. And I'm going to put a mic in right here. just finishing these off here. Peter says, I like the Beyerdynamic better, a little more neutral. Darren says, both sound good. I think the SR314 attenuates your 900 hertz range voice anomaly. Very good. Linda agrees with Techno. We'll be back, Moylan, for some questions, so you can ask another question a little bit later on. And same we've got some other questions coming in. More low end on the Earthworks. Definitely can hear crisper highs on the Beyerdynamic. Both are pretty good on my Gentle X studio monitors. Now listening on AKG 702s. More sibilance now apparent on the Beyer. What foamy are you using on the Beyer? This is actually the foam that comes with the Shure SM7B, the thicker one. And I actually do that intentionally now. Yes, foam can change the sound of the microphone a little bit. With my sibilant voice, that's actually not usually a bad thing because it's usually attenuating some of the highs. And usually that sounds okay in my case. On Sonal SMH 1000s, the top end on the Beyerdynamic sounds a little more articulate, not harsh, and the Earthworks a little smoother. Excellent. Thank you. I quite like the Beyer on your voice, slightly more clarity without bad sibilance. Very good. Well, thanks. That's a lot of fun to do things like that, especially when I have the ears of a bunch of soundies that can help me articulate these. So thanks very much for playing along. Let's do a couple of things here. I'm going to close these windows because we're going to come back to things later over here. I want to play, or we'll give you some samples from another microphone here, $1,700 microphone, usually uses a boom microphone. Let's switch on over. And any of you that saw what it was when I revealed the MixPad app, please don't share yet. Okay, now we're talking on this microphone right here. This is a $1,700 microphone, typically uses a boom microphone, but it can be used for other things as well. And I'm curious what your impressions are of this microphone relative to the Beyerdynamic. And maybe we can switch back to the Earthworks too if you're curious about all those sounds there. But now that you all have good headphones and near-field monitors out, curious to hear what you say about these microphones right here. So this is a condenser microphone, obviously phantom powered, 48 volts. I think you can power it with 24 as well. Have to double check that. You want me to move it a bit closer. Well, the reason I'm not is because it's typically used as a boom mic. We could, but here I am about the same distance that I was from the Beyer now. And so it is, yes, it is a different polar pattern. So this is a supercardioid polar pattern instead of a cardioid polar pattern. So it will sound a little bit more, it'll have narrow, and it'll probably fall off a little sooner. As I move off to the side, for example, it probably falls off a little bit more quickly than the other microphones did, which both had cardioid polar patterns. So here we go around this microphone here. So the new one sounds more closed in. Let's see here. So we moved in a little bit closer, just making sure my levels are still good here. Yep, still good. Much flatter with less low end at the original distance. DPA 4017, bit more MIDI. Yeah, definitely more mid-rangey. Picks up less room, which is a characteristic of its polar pattern, most likely. Aaron, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Now I have put on my 7506s. Very good. So, Linda, you've got your mixing headphones on. Not as fond of the 1700 microphone as either of the Earthworks or Beyer. Isn't that interesting? Hopefully that makes my point here. Mike says, I think I still prefer the Earthworks on your voice. Let's do a little switching back and forth again. Let's go back to the Earthworks now. Okay, now we're back on the Earthworks SR314 and try and maintain the distance about the same here so that you can get a sense here. So the Earthworks is it's actually kind of a wide cardioid polar pattern. Made originally as a vocal performance mic, so for singing, really. But I found it just kind of suits my voice pretty nicely. So this is the Earthworks SR314, switching over to the Beyerdynamic. Now here we are back on the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X. Again, just to sort of reset our ears before we head back to our $1,650, $1,700 boom microphone. All right, now here we are back on the mystery microphone. Just again, wanted to reset your ears a little bit there, give you a little something to listen to. So there's some things there. Let's see what people have to say. Boulder Surfer says, sounds like Sheps, ? I read that you can buy one body and then buy different capsules, one for indoor and outdoor, and spending less money, but is MKH50 and 418 DPA or Sheps have good, or is it low-end stuff? Not sure I understand the question, but those are not cheap microphones, any of those. All of them are north of $1,000 US. So, yes, you can buy a one body or amplifier stage and then different capsules to go with that. There are definitely, DPA does some of that. Trying to think if Sennheiser has any. Maybe some others know of some Sennheisers that do that. I think the K6 does that. So there are some options like that. Daniel says, so far I like the Beyer the best. Aaron says, I don't know how much coffee is in Utah, but have one on me. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. The Beyer and Earthworks seem wider in frequency response. Can't wait for the Beyer to appear in the UK. Mike says, or perhaps it's a Sanken. Could be a Sanken. $1,700 mic is a little hollow. Good thought on the Sanken, I would assume. I missed the low end, says Soto. Definitely de-emphasize the low frequencies. Okay, well, let's do a reveal here. Let me switch back over to the Beyer. Okay, we're back on the Beyerdynamic. Let me just pull this microphone off and show you. This will become immediately recognizable for some of you, especially those working in the production sound world. This is a Sheps Colette CMC641, legendary boom microphone for indoor use mainly. You could use it outdoors as well, technically, but this microphone doesn't sound great on my voice, and it's a $1,700 microphone, so what gives? That's the question. Here's what I found with this microphone. So it actually sounds good on some voices, but it actually sounds fairly harsh. And I think on a lot of other voices, I think what Sheps claims is that they are trying to make their microphones as uncolored as possible and capture reality so that in post you can tune them and sweeten them however you choose. But their starting philosophy, at least, is that let's capture what's really there and then let post make some decisions on how they want to handle things from there. So I don't use this one a whole lot on my own voice. However, in some of my corporate work, I definitely have used it in the past. And actually at work today, we own one of these and we use it sometimes too. So in any case, there's some thoughts there. Ian says, for some reason, the Beyer sounds smoother than it did in your earlier demo video. Interesting. We are using a different mixer and preamplifier. So I'm now using the Allen & Heath SQ5. In the video on my main channel, that was recorded, the talking head portion was recorded through a Sound Devices 888, and the sample clips were actually recorded into a MixPre 3. So we used a variety of different preamplifiers. I like the Earthworks. 1700 seems flatter both. Peter saw the name on the mixer. So thanks for holding out, Peter. Less low hum with the Beyer versus the Earthworks. Interesting. The Sheps sounds neutral and has good noise rejection. Also good point about it being malleable in post. And I think that's really, I can make this microphone with some EQ sound fantastic in post. But it does sound a little bit rough right out of the camera, or right out of the recorder. Excuse me. So just some important things to keep in mind. So you can get great sound on less expensive microphones. I think my take is generally once you get above $200, you start finding a few gems here and there. I think the Rode NT1 is one of the first ones that come to mind. It's a $270 microphone for a large diaphragm condenser. Pretty good. I like the M90 Pro X from Beyerdynamic, really pretty good. It's about a $350 microphone. The Stellar X3 from Tech Zone Audio, which is a horrible, I wish they'd change the name of that company, or just call it TZA Audio, or TZ Audio. Yeah, TZ Audio. Anyway, that's a pretty good mic. Again, also right around the $300 mark is price point, as I recall. And then once you start going up from there, most of them can certainly be made to sound great in post. I think Sheps is a great example of how a microphone doesn't sound great on my voice unless you do some work on it, some compression perhaps, and definitely some EQ as well. So some thoughts there. Making us work today. Sorry about that, Linda, but this is all about learning, and so yeah, there's a lot to listen to and a lot to learn here. Can't go wrong for your voice with the Beyer. If it sounds good on one's voice, it's an unbeatable deal at that price. And I agree. I think that's really kind of the point I wanted to make here, is that every voice is different. Every microphone interacts with every voice a little bit differently. So ideally, it'd be great if we had more places where you could go again and record your voice through a bunch of different microphones. Go home, listen to them, and then make a decision from there. I'd love to see more kind of opportunities like that. It's a little bit tricky, but anyway. Okay, so let's go back over here and let me just pull up the agenda here just to get track of where we're at. We'll go back to that. Okay, so we talked about the Earthworks versus the Beyerdynamic. We brought in the Sheps CMC 641, talked a little bit about price versus how it sounds. And let's move on to our questions. So we had a good number of questions that were sent in ahead of time, and then we'll come to the chat after this. I'll be traveling to Glasgow next month to shoot some interviews at the COP26 climate conference. It looks like legal and license-free UHF channels in the UK are in the 800s, and I don't have a wireless system that works in that range. So I'm thinking about picking up a 2.4 gigahertz system like the Deity Connect. Is 2.4 gigahertz the best way to go, and are any of these systems reliable for professional work? Well, I'm glad you asked that. And I had a conversation via email with somebody about this conversation or this very topic recently. And the email was even more directed than that. So Jeremy's asking a very practical question, and we will definitely answer that with my impressions, but I'd love to get yours as well. The question that I got in email was similar, but a little bit different. And that was somebody said that they were a little bit weary of hearing YouTubers say, or professionals in audio forums say, that 2.4 gigahertz wireless systems are rubbish, and the only thing that a pro would ever use is a UHF system. Now, that's, of course, an extreme way to put it from my point of view, but the sentiment is, I understand the sentiment, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I don't think that's a false claim, but I think it needs a little bit of context as well. And let me explain what I mean. I'm just going to get that out of our way here and declutter a little bit. The professional UHF wireless systems can do things that the more affordable UHF systems cannot do, and that the 2.4 gigahertz systems generally cannot do as well. So some of those things include the ability to transmit in tighter slices of the spectrum. So they can, for example, the Shure Axient Digital system can, I can't remember the number, but it was some ridiculous number of channels within a single UHF television band. So in essence, what those professional systems allow you to do at a practical level is that when you're working on a professional show, either a musical or in a theater, an installed sound on a film set, you can run easily more than 10, more than 20, maybe even up to more than 30 different channels on those wireless systems. On a 2.4 gigahertz system, you cannot do that. The spectrum will be saturated. The 2.4 gigahertz spectrum will be saturated once you get past either 4 or 8 channels. I think some of them claim that they can operate on 8 channels. I think that's kind of like in a best case scenario. Certainly once you get past that, they're dropping all over the place. And in fact, on some of them, The Pico mic, for example, I remember when I did a review of that probably 3 years ago now. It's been a while, maybe 2 years ago. Somebody had bought one on my recommendation, but they had actually bought multiple kits, and those were a 2-transmitter, dual-channel receiver type of setup. He was running a kind of a web TV show, and he had four channels, and he was having problems with them dropping out even after, if he used anything more than 2, things were unreliable. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So keep that first of all in mind. If you need a lot of channels, that's where a 2.4 gigahertz system can't generally keep up. Another thing is that, with the exception perhaps of the Deity Connect, a lot of the 2.4 gigahertz systems, the consumer systems in particular, there's no option to connect an external antenna. So if you wanted to set up a larger antenna, a dipole array, a shark fin type antenna, not even an option. With the Deity Connect you can, but I don't know of any on the market. You'd have to make your own. Andrew from Deity actually has made his own, and he has a video on their YouTube channel about that. So that is an option there if you need something like that, something where you can potentially get a little bit more range. What I found with the Deity Connect in my particular testing is that outdoors it seemed to really struggle at distance. So I think we only got maybe 15 meters away with the pack on my back, me facing the camera and the receiver, and it started dropping out at that point. And this is in a wide open space, so there's nothing for any of the RF to interact with, really, just kind of goes off. So that's where those are going to kind of struggle. So I think the question is this, but on the other hand, actually, I should say, there are plenty of videographers that are using 2.4 gigahertz wireless systems, and if they're doing relatively close distance, camera, talking head, types of things, that they can actually work quite well. You know, not doing a lot of channels, maybe 1 or 2, they can work pretty well. And I've used them actually on paid jobs before. I've used the RodeLink wireless kit on paid jobs in the past. So they can be used for professional work, but I think there's an important distinction. Now, there are some other things that some of the more advanced UHF systems are doing now too. So in addition to the ability to connect these additional receivers or antennae, the Shure Axient Digital, gosh, I always trip on that. Shure Axient Digital system also does frequency diversity. So it can actually change on the fly which frequencies it's using to maintain connectivity. So if it's struggling for whatever reason, if you're struggling to keep a connection for a particular channel, it can actually hop around, and it's pretty intelligent in terms of how it does it. So now 2.4 gigahertz does that within the 2.4 gigahertz narrow band. It does do some hopping around. Most of the systems do that, but there's only so far they can go. And that's why when you get more than 4 channels, they tend to really that's when they really start dropping stuff. The Deity Connect, I think, is potentially a good option. Again, if you're going to be outdoors in the wide open, be careful. If you're going to be using a lot of channels of wireless, be careful. But otherwise, I think it can be a good choice. So those are my thoughts on that question. Thank you for the question, Jeremy. It's a very good one. Hal asks, in your view, are the auto sound touch-up features in Premiere good enough for a web video? I'm editing it and trying to get the biggest improvement to sound with the least amount of work. It's 30 videos all in the same exact location across 4 days. That's a great question, and Hal, I can't answer that for you, but what I can say is that it's entirely up to you. It's up to your ears, and you just need to make a decision. And I don't know if there are other considerations as well. Are you being paid? Are they paying enough for you to go in and actually carefully apply EQ and compression and whatever other effects you want to apply to make the best possible sound? If they're not paying for that, then probably it's not. But if you apply those auto features in Premiere and it sounds better to your ears, then it is better, and move ahead with it. So that's my advice for you on that front. Hopefully that helps. All right. David asks, I have been told that the Zoom H4n could handle a line level input as opposed to mic level if a 1/4 inch cable is used. I tried this and it did not work, got horrible distortion. I used an XLR attenuator to solve the problem, but is there a way for the H4n and F4, H6, I have all 3, to handle line level input without the use of an XLR attenuator? Yes. So I actually tested that as well. Let me just get this queued up here. Let me show you something here. So this is from the manual for the H4n. It does say that you can use a line level source. And what I found in my testing is, yes, you have to plug in the 1/4 inch TRS cable. Make sure it's TRS. If it was TRS and it was a line level signal coming from something else, then maybe there's something wrong with your H4n. You probably want to contact Zoom to confirm. But as long as you're using a 1/4 inch TRS input with a line level signal into the H4n, one of its two XLR inputs, or they're actually XLR TRS combo inputs, then it should work. And I've tested that on my H4n and it did work. So that's the first thing. On the F4, let me just switch on over to the manual for the F4. They're actually very clear here. That the H4n manual was not clear, but the F4 manual is clear. Connect the TRS plugs of keyboards and mixers directly to inputs 1 through 4. So if you use a TRS, again, tip, ring, sleeve, if you use a TRS into one of those inputs on the F4, then the F4 automatically knows at that point, okay, this is a line level signal, so it switches that input to line level. So there are some thoughts there. Hopefully that helps, David. And if that still doesn't help, then you probably need to get in touch with Zoom and see what's going on with those particular units and maybe that particular cable. All right, Lewin. Great news from Lewin. Lewin had a question last week. He was getting ready to go into his first job as a sound mixer. He says, just a quick update. My first job as a sound mixer this week went great. I'm from the Caribbean, and we were shooting a contributor interview for a documentary show in the States. I provided 2 audio sources from the talent, a boom and a wireless lav concealed with Rycote stickies. First time doing that, and it worked great. Into the mix pre-6.2. The information from these sessions definitely helped me out. Thanks, Curtis, and by extension, everyone else. Yes, thank you, everybody, for helping each other out. That's really what kind of makes me excited about this community and keeps me coming back every week. So I hope that's helpful for you as well, and it sounds like it is for Lewin. What suggestions do you have for sound bags for the Mix Pre 6.2? Well, let me just pull this up here. I don't have a bag for my Mix Pre 6.2. I actually don't have a Mix Pre 6.2. I have a Mix Pre 3. I'm mostly using that on a table, but here are the ones that I would look at. Oh, this is over at B&H. I would actually probably take a look at the K-Tech Stingray Mix Pro audio bag. This one right here. But there are a number of others out there. Porter Brace actually has several of them, different configurations depending on what you want. Orca makes both the OR27 and the OR270. If you want something that's really small, the 270 might be worth looking at. This one's a little bit bigger, but it does have the ability to open all the different sides. Kind of a good one. I have the OR30. I wouldn't do that. It's too big. This is the OR30 right here. This is really made for something like the 633, 833, Zaxcom Max, Zoom F8, those style. But you have a lot of different options here. Having seen it in person, I would probably look at the K-Tech first, the Stingray. And if anyone else has other recommendations you've used from experience, definitely let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear from you on that. Other question from Lewin, as well as what battery packs or power sources do you suggest? I use an Anker USB battery bank, and that worked pretty nicely. What I would recommend is that when you are looking if you are going to use a USB battery bank, make sure it has the PD specification on it, so power delivery. You want to make sure that it also is USB-C so that you can run that directly into the Mix Pre 6's USB-C input, and that should power it. Right there, you're going to need one of the larger, you can't use a tiny little USB battery bank. It needs to be a little bit larger, and it needs to have that power delivery or PD specification to deliver enough current for the Mix Pre. So hopefully that helps you there. Thank you, Lewin. Matt says, actually, this is an interesting one. USB-C battery bank from a name brand. Yes, I use Anker. I've had a very good experience with Anker, A-N-K-E-R. They've done a pretty nice job. But if others have other suggestions in terms of name brands, definitely let us know. All right. I apologize. I don't know how to pronounce this name. And I think it's Anyway, I'm currently using a Saramonic UW Mic 9S UHF transmitter and receiver aside of my Deity S-Mic 2S shotgun mic running through a cable. I'm thinking of adding a backup 2.4 gigahertz wireless transmitter, looking at a Saramonic Blink 500 Pro as a backup transmitter to be used together with the UHF system. Would it cause a problem if I use them both at the same time on one person? Or would it cause any interference with each other wirelessly? I would say, in theory, no, it shouldn't be a problem. I would keep the transmitters as far away from each other as you can. I wouldn't put them right next to each other. But in theory, it shouldn't be a problem. However, I have not tried this in practice, so they're using completely different frequency ranges. But if you keep them, my guess is that if you keep them away from each other, if you could, and I don't mean you don't have to go far. Obviously, they're going to be on the same person, but I wouldn't stack them right next to each other. I'd just space them out a little bit if you can. If you can get 6 inches between them, that'd be great. And start there, and I think you should be fine. If anyone has hands-on experience with that, definitely let us know down below. But in theory, it shouldn't be a problem. All right, Andrew has a question. Not an urgent question, but I was wondering if you had any quick tips on getting the most from iZotope RX8 de-esser. I do. Let's get you some quick tips here. Let me just get this all queued up. Let's switch on over to the Mac. All right. We are in iZotope RX8. I have pulled up the de-esser plugin. What I would recommend is when you come in, it's on the default. I would change it to Control Vocal Sibilance. Now you have those settings. I would then go ahead and preview. While you're listening through, you can adjust the threshold. If you want to, you can also output the S's only. This is what it will actually be removing from the audio. And let me just run through a few times. This is actually a recording of me. And let's just show you what we get here. So here we go. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, it is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit. This is probably where I would end up on that. I went down to the minus 21.2. I did it based entirely by ear. So I would, that's generally how I would approach it. Change it to Control Vocal Sibilance, mainly adjust the threshold here, and that's kind of the straightforward quick tips version of how I would approach de-essing in iZotope RX with the de-ess module. So that hopefully is helpful for you too. Again, with de-essing, just like almost any other processing, my general philosophy is you just want to do a little bit in as much as possible. If you get really hardcore and really crush, you could hear on one of those. In fact, I'll do it again. It basically gave me a lisp. Let's do this. I'm going to mute my own mic here so you can hear that 100%. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Okay, so that's what Curtis sounds like with a lisp. I have actually an anti-lisp usually, but that's kind of the quick and dirty, Andrew, on how I would go about using the de-esser in iZotope RX. So hopefully that is helpful to you. Now this next one I'm going to definitely need some help on. It's not exactly a sound question, but here it is from Trevor. I may need to read this. It's really small because there's so much here. I'm looking for options for getting good quality video out to Skype, Zoom, etc. when live streaming from OBS. My good cameras all feed an A10 Mini Pro, which is fed into OBS. None of the video call software programs can access the A10 when it is in use by another application, in this case OBS. I've been using the virtual OBS camera to feed the video call programs along with a virtual audio cable to take the sound from OBS. The problem with this is when I do a split screen and show myself with a guest in the program window, that is the image that is being sent back over the video call versus them seeing just me through a camera. And I have to confess my head's spinning a little bit here in terms of how all this is working, but let's get through this and come back. I have a webcam that can be fed directly to the video call software, but I'm not having any luck getting a good picture out of it. Even though it's supposed to be a high-end webcam, AverMedia PW513, way too much noise regardless of the lighting. I'm also considering using a capture card to hook up another mirrorless camera and feed that only to the video software. So if anyone has tips here for Trevor, please. I do not know a whole ton about OBS. I used it a few times 3 or 4 years ago. Got frustrated with it and left, ended up using Ecamm Live instead. Used it. Streamlabs OBS were used recently for work, but I wasn't operating it directly. But it's giving us some trouble too in terms of audio, so we are working on some things there. But I guess I'm a little surprised that if OBS is using the webcam that nothing else can at the same time. I guess I do have a question as well, is if instead you were able to get a feed directly from your remote people, and you can do that in OBS using something called Video Ninja, vdo.ninja. If you go to that URL, basically on their end, in a web browser in Chrome, they can actually contribute their whatever camera they're using and audio they're using as a stream. You get the URL for that, and you can actually plug that directly into OBS. So you're getting that feed directly from them. Actually, it's actually going through Video Ninja, I think, or a cloud service or something. I'm not entirely sure how it's working. But we've used that before with good results. That's one thing you can do. And then in that case, whatever call software you're using, Zoom, whatever, just becomes your back channel, and you're not using that to display anything in your live stream. So that's probably a higher quality way to do that, if that's a possibility for you. And then in that case, whatever you put, whatever webcam you use, like the AverMedia, if it looks crappy, it doesn't matter because it's just the back channel. It's not what you're actually going to be putting into your stream. So if anyone has ideas on how other things that Trevor could do to solve this particular problem, definitely please let us know in the chat here. It'd be really helpful. So Trevor, thanks for the question. All right. Let's go back to the chat and see what we've got here. If you do have a question, if you could put @CurtisJuddAudio, that'll kind of highlight it for me and make it a little easier for me to find. First, not a question, but from Mark, RX8 Advanced is currently $400 off on their website, and I believe if you buy it now, double check this, but I believe if you buy it now, you also get the upgrade to 9 when that comes out, and I think it's imminent. I think it's supposed to come out in the next few weeks here. So, Etienne, hello, Curtis. Do you use some kind of sound cart or follow cart to bring all your gear on set? Any recommendations for someone who mainly records sound in solo? Yes, I use the Sound Cart Mini from a company called Soundcart. And what's the URL for that? Let me just find that. It's actually a fellow in the UK that builds them himself. Soundcart. It's soundcart.tv is the URL you want to go to. And they actually updated it recently. Now they have the Mini Cart Max, but I have the Mini Cart. You'll see that. They also have it now in all black. But in any case, actually, I can share this, of course. So this is what they look like right here, Etienne. Let me just bring this off the screen. There we go, so you can see that. So they make a variety of different carts, but this is the one I use right here. And it looks like they have it now. If they had this all black before, I would have gotten the all black version. But they also have, this is sort of a utility or follow cart here. I actually have a Rock and Roller Stealth that I use to haul all of my other gear. And it has a shelf on it. Let me see if I can pull that up. think they have it at B&H here. Rock and roller stealth. There it is. So this is the cart I have here. That's for hauling usually the bigger stuff. And I have a bag that can fit over this. You can put C-stands, boom poles, other stuff in that. It also has some options here, if I can find them. Doesn't show them here, but there's some bottom pieces you can put that are felt covered on the bottom to keep things from getting, falling through or getting scratched up. And they also have a shelf that you can put on here. And so I put the shelf on, and that's where I do a lot of my prep work. So as I'm getting the wireless channels ready, for example, I'll have that shelf on, and I'll be working. That'll be my kind of mini follow cart or table to work from. So that's typically what I do when I'm on set. So hopefully that is helpful for you. Let's see. Camerahead Studios, what do you think about having a DBX286 or a Behringer Composer MDX 2600 on a sound card? I think for a live event, that would be great. I wouldn't see any issues with that. Of course, you're going to have to find AC power to power things, or you're going to need a fairly sizable DC battery with an inverter. But you could definitely do that. I think it could be a good choice, definitely. I wouldn't typically for production sound use something like a DBX. Yeah, I wouldn't do any compression generally for production sound where there's going to be post. But if you are doing live, I definitely would. In fact, for our live stream, we just bought, not this live stream, but the one for work. We just bought a DBX 286 for our main host, and I think that's a fine choice. Anyone know a good carry-on case to hold 16 Micro Series 98 watt-hour V-mount battery you leave for Africa next month? Pelican is probably the first thing I would look at. So I don't know. If anyone else has other recommendations for Matt, definitely let us know. But I would probably look at a Pelican case of some sort. You can customize the interior of them in terms of you can get foam, or they have a different kind of system for creating custom sizes for the things you're going to put in them. So that would probably be my first choice. This is a question that was actually asked early on. I want to go back to this. Akshay asked, got my DDS mic 2 yesterday. It's working, but something is shaking inside the mic. Dealer has agreed to replace my unit with another one. Still curious what could be moving inside. Sounds like a manufacturing defect of some sort. So glad that they're able to exchange that for you. And it's sad to see that, but yeah, hopefully that solves it. It's probably a screw rattling around in there or some debris from the manufacturing process, but you definitely don't want that in there. You could short things, or even if just as you're cueing the microphone back and forth, the microphone could pick that up. So definitely something that you don't want. Okay. Mark says, this is from earlier, so this is a little bit out of context at this point, but let me just read this. The 2.4 gigahertz wireless is right up my alley, using Sennheiser AVX with a COS 11. Get a low-level warbling sound sometimes. Hard to duplicate and test. Looking for Electro versus Sound Devices A10. That's weird about the warbling. So the Sennheiser AVX, I think in the States here actually uses 1.9 gigahertz. I think it's actually not 2.4 gigahertz, but so it's sharing with cordless phones, or what used to be available for cordless phones. Or I think it is still available. It's just there aren't a lot of cordless. Are there still cordless phones? I guess there are still cordless phones. Some people still have them. But in any case, I'm not sure about this low-level warbling. That's an odd one. Hard to duplicate and test. But yeah, I would... I don't know if that's interference in the frequency range that you're working with your AVX, or if it has sort of a digital warbling sound, is it really fast in terms of its frequency? That's really weird. If it is faster, I would probably assume it's some sort of digital signal that's interfering with it. But that's odd. That's one I haven't encountered before. Okay, moving on here. Oh, Aaron, thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. All right. going back again, we went back to the start. We're making our way forward here. Mike says, my wallet bears the scars of me trying to find the perfect spoken word mic for my voice. I've learned that it's not about cost. It's about the voice mic combo. Amen. I definitely agree with you on that, Mike. Jeremy might want to consider hiring a UK legal system. Good hire companies will sort the license for you. UK license free is in the 865 megahertz range there. Okay. I'm looking for a tripod to use with my iPhone and Sony a7 III. Can you give any advice or a few options to choose from? My basic wish list is 1, reliable materials, 2, about 5 foot 9 inches. Not a tripod expert here. And I don't know what your budget is, but here are the tripods I use. I have a Manfrotto, really old photography tripod. In fact, that's what the streaming camera now sits on. I don't even remember the model number. I don't think they make it anymore. It was from over a decade ago. For my bigger cameras, I use a Miller tripod, and then for my smaller cameras, I use an E-Image tripod. E-Image is a brand. They have both aluminum and carbon fiber tripods. I personally prefer the when I'm working with video cameras, I prefer the type of tripods that have dual legs, where you just I'm trying to describe it, and I don't have it right here. It's out in the other room at the moment, but where you release 3 knobs on the side and you can just lift the tripod up to the height you need and then lock them really quickly. That works a lot better than the single leg, or where the tripods, each leg is a single tube. In my opinion, the single tube, that's what my Miller is, and I wish I had bought the kind with the 2 tubes for each leg. There's probably a better term for this. See, I'm not even a camera guy anymore, so I don't even know what the right terms are. Anyway, Oben makes some that are a little bit more affordable, worth looking at. What's the British company called? They used to make the slider. That was their first product, I think. I don't remember what they're called. If someone knows, definitely put it in the chat. So those are my very broken thoughts on tripods. Hante, do you mostly use Sound Blanket on corporate work, and is that the best investment, and how big and how many do you usually need? Well, it depends. In my previous job, yes, when I went in and we were just using a conference room for shooting an interview, for example, or recording voiceover, then yes, I would usually bring them with me. I use the bigger blankets from vocalbooth2go.com. I usually brought in 2 or 3 of them with me. The more you can bring, the better, depending on how bad the room is that you're trying to treat. So I think that's a good investment if you're working on location, yes. Or if you're working in a space where you cannot attach something to the walls, that can be a good choice as well. Mike wanted to confirm, back on the question about getting line level into a Zoom recorder, Mike says that he is using a Zoom F4 with a TS line input with no problems. Excellent. So we know it's possible. Let's see here. Trevor, thanks so much for the super chat. Appreciate that. And the question. Jeff asks, what's your next investment for sound gear? Oh. Well, I don't know. I don't have anything specifically in mind right at the moment, but I'm excited about the fact that Sound Devices released the new transmitters for the audio limited wireless system, the A10, now the A20 transmitter, which is much smaller. It has what's called a gain forward feature. So what that means is I can actually control the gain for the transmitter from my Sound Devices 888 mixer, which is a really nice option. But then also there's the Shure Axient digital wireless system, which you basically do not, I don't know exactly how it works yet. I'm going to start working on it this week. I have one of the transmitters and the receivers here. They do it a little bit differently. From what I can tell, you don't set the gain. You set the output level at the receiver. To be determined. I haven't played with it yet, so I don't know for sure. But in any case, So I was a little bit torn and thought, well, should I do that or what should I do? So we're going to do some evaluation. I'm not sure yet. Kevin, it is absolutely fantastic to hear from you if you're still there. I hope you're doing well, and I know you had to take a little bit of a break there, but it's great to see you back. So hope everything's going well for you. Thanks for coming by. The Unmarketing Group says, would you recommend 2 shark fin directional antennas or 1 directional one and 1 omni like the bow tie? I think it depends on what you're doing with production sound. Usually a lot of production mixers will use 2 shark fins. You have to kind of tune the spacing, and they are directional, of course, as you mentioned here. But usually that's what I find a lot of the production mixers are doing. A bow tie is omnidirectional, so you're not going to get quite as much range, but you're also not going to be quite as, you're not going to have to be as particular about positioning it or aiming it. So those are some thoughts there. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. All right, Techno Cheesecake, will you do a soldering video on how to fix microphones? I recently had to fix some DPAs and some were filtered for electro with a cap and a resistor. Always good to know how to fix. Well, you're getting a little bit outside of my area of expertise, to be honest. I'm more going to be focused on, I would love to do, well, the short version. I'd love to do that. I don't know how to do that. I have a soldering iron, but I haven't done a lot of repair work. I've just basically soldered cables. So that's all I've done so far. So I'll have to come back at some point and get that. It may be a while before I get to something like that. So, Darren, I use Heil boom arms for my ham radio gear. I need to get a boom arm for office mics. The Rode boom arm looks interesting. Any thoughts? Yes, Darren, I actually had a Heil boom arm. That was my first boom arm. I think it was $79 or $8, and maybe it was $100 at the most. It's been years since I purchased it. But I, over time, found that the mechanism up here on the front that holds the mic, that got really bad on the Heil after a while. Like I couldn't position, especially the heavier broadcast style mics, it just wouldn't hold them. And it would move all over the place. It made some noise when you moved it. So it just wasn't a great option. I haven't done a lot of work with the Rode yet. I just got it out yesterday. This is the Rode PSA 1 Plus, but I can say that this mechanism is unquestionably better than what I had on the Heils. And so, if I had to make a recommendation right now today, I'd probably say go with the Rodes. PSA 1 Plus. So that's my thought on that one. Linda asked, do you make your own cables? I have, but I don't as a rule. My latest cable purchase was made from Alan Williams of Sound Speeds on YouTube. You may be familiar with him. He makes excellent cables, but he's not in that business. Now that he's back to work, he's stopped doing it. Darn it. He makes really good cables. He also puts ferrite cores on them. He uses the top quality connectors. Great cabling. He's using the Canary. I'm not sure how you say it. So he's put together some really good cables. Outside of that, the place I go to have my cables made is a place here in Salt Lake, so down the mountain from here, called Performance Audio, and they do custom cables. So they've always treated me very well. So a lot of my cables are made by them with Mogami cabling and Neutrik connectors. So, all right. I think that's it, and we've come to our time. Thanks everyone so much for joining us today. I hope that this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for the questions. Thanks so much for helping each other out here in the chat and being a part of the community. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody. Oh, and the transition's going to be a little slower here because I'm working solo.
Reason for